Welcome once again to Justified Nonetheless. I am Kevin Berger, and I apply the principles of polemics and skepticism to atheism and the claims made by atheists. In this video, I discuss with ChatGPT, link in the description, the likelihood of non-belief in reality. So without further ado, let's get right to it. I initiate this conversation by asking, is it true that given a pair of antithetical propositions, the less credence one lends to the original claim, the more credence is lent to its negation? The reply to that is, the principle you're referring to is known as the law of non-contradiction in classical logic. It states that contradictory propositions cannot both be true in the same sense simultaneously. In other words, if one proposition is true, then its negation must be false and vice versa. In the context of belief or credence, if you assign a low probability or credence to a certain proposition, it means you don't think it's very likely to be true. This implies that you are giving a higher probability or credence to its negation because the probabilities of these two propositions must add up to 1, assuming that they are mutually exclusive. For example, if you believe that a proposition "it will rain tomorrow" has a very low probability, let's say 10%, then you are implicitly giving a higher probability, 90%, to its negation "it will not rain tomorrow." This principle aligns with basic principles of logical consistency. However, in practical reasoning and decision making, it's important to note that these beliefs and credences may be influenced by a wide range of factors, including evidence, prior beliefs, cognitive biases, and emotional considerations. Therefore, people's actual beliefs may not always conform perfectly to formal logic. I then ask, is it true that belief is a consideration of finding a proposition to be more likely to be true than untrue? And the answer to that is yes. That's a very reasonable way to define belief. Belief generally involves considering a proposition to be more likely to be true than untrue. When you believe something, you have a certain level of confidence or credence in its truth. It's important to note that beliefs can be influenced by various factors, including evidence, prior experiences, cultural influences, personal biases, and emotional considerations. Additionally, beliefs can vary in strength or confidence level. For example, you might have a strong belief in something that you consider extremely likely to be true, or you might have a weaker belief where you consider something more likely to be true than not, but with less confidence. Keep in mind that beliefs can be provisional and subject to change based on new evidence or experiences. This is part of the natural process of learning and adapting one's understanding of the world. I then ask, is it true then that given a pair of dichotomous proposition, the one to which greater credence is lent is the one believed? And the answer to that is yes, that's generally correct. When faced with a pair of dichotomous propositions, meaning they are mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustible, one of them must be true and the other false. People tend to believe the proposition to which they assign greater credence or probability. For example, if you believe proposition A is more likely to be true than proposition B, then you are more likely to believe proposition A. It's important to note that this is a general principle and individual beliefs can be influenced by a wide range of factors, including evidence, prior beliefs, biases, and personal experiences. Additionally, beliefs can be held with varying degrees of certainty or confidence. People might believe something strongly with high confidence or more tentatively with lower confidence. Overall, belief is a complex cognitive process and is shaped by a combination of rational deliberations and emotional intuitive considerations. I then ask, is it true that the more compelling that one finds arguments in favor of a claim, the more credence one lends to that proposition? And the answer to that is yes. In general, if someone finds the arguments in favor of a claim to be compelling, they are more likely to lend more credence or belief to that proposition. When presented with persuasive and well-supported arguments, people tend to be more inclined to believe the claim being argued for. However, it's important to note that the degree of persuasiveness can vary from person to person, and what one person finds compelling, another may not. Belief formation is influenced by a variety of factors, including prior beliefs, personal experiences, cognitive biases, and emotional responses. Additionally, it's crucial for critical thinking to not just accept claims based solely on the strength of the arguments, but to also consider the quality of the evidence and reliability of the sources presenting those arguments. Critical thinking involves evaluating arguments and evidence in a balanced and rational manner. So while compelling arguments can certainly influence belief, it's not the only factor at play in belief formation. I then ask, does it matter if one finds the arguments more lends more credence to a proposition by a substantial degree or by a minuscule amount? Or is it irrelevant how infinitesimal the disparity is in the degree of credence one lends to a pair of antithetical propositions? Whichever is greater is the one that is believed. And the answer to that is, in practice, the magnitude of disparity in credence can be significant. If one finds the arguments in favor of a proposition to be substantially more compelling than those against it, they are likely to lend much greater credence to that proposition. However, in theory, even a minuscule difference in the degree of credence can be determinative of belief. According to probability theory, as long as one proposition has a higher probability assigned to it than its negation, it should be considered as the more likely belief. This is because probabilities must sum to 1. So in theory, even a very small difference in degree of credence can be decisive, but practically speaking, a substantial disparity in the strength of arguments is more likely to lead to a clear belief. Remember, though, that belief is a complex psychological and philosophical topic, and it's influenced by various factors including evidence, prior beliefs, biases, and personal experiences. It's also important to consider that beliefs can be provisional and subject to change based on new information or experiences. I then say, is it true then that a perfect equilibrium in the degree of credence lent to a pair of dichotomous propositions be required to maintain the result of a state of non-belief in either of them? And we kind of go off the rails here. The response I get is not necessarily. While a perfect equilibrium in the credence, assigning equal probabilities to each of a pair of dichotomous propositions, would result in a state of indecision or uncertainty, it doesn't necessarily lead to a state of complete non-belief in either proposition. In a state of perfect equilibrium, you might not have a strong belief in either proposition, but it doesn't mean you completely reject both. Instead, it implies you find both propositions equally plausible or implausible. This state of indecision might be due to insufficient evidence, conflicting information, or simply a lack of clear reason to lean towards one proposition over the other. Non-belief, on the other hand, typically implies a stance of rejecting or not accepting a proposition as true. It's possible to have a non-belief in a proposition without having a perfect equilibrium in the degree of credence. For example, you might have a very low credence in a proposition due to strong evidence against it, even if you don't assign a perfectly equal probability to its negation. In summary, a perfect equilibrium in the degree of credence can result in a state of indecision, but doesn't necessarily lead to a state of non-belief in either proposition. Non-belief can arise from either reasons, including strong evidence against a proposition. So I kind of reel him back in here and I say, you agree that if there is any disparity, no matter how small, between the credence lent to either a pair of dichotomous propositions, the one to which greater credence is lent is the one that is believed. Does it not logically follow from this that to believe neither a claim nor its negation, one cannot lend any more credence to either of them? And now we kind of get back to where we're supposed to be. You're correct, and I apologize for the confusion caused by a previous response. Let's clarify. If there is any disparity, no matter how small, between the credence lent to a pair of dichotomous propositions, the one to which greater credence is lent is the one that is believed. In other words, if you lend even the tiniest bit more credence to one proposition over its negation, you would be inclined to believe that proposition. So, to believe neither a claim nor its negation, you would need to maintain a perfect equilibrium in the degree of credence assigned to each proposition. This would mean assigning exactly equal probabilities to both the claim and its negation. In this state of perfect equilibrium, you wouldn't have a stronger belief in either proposition and would effectively be in a state of non-belief regarding both. Thank you for bringing this to my attention. I appreciate your patience in seeking clarification. So then I ask, then you agree that this require a perfect equilibrium be maintained with regard to the degree of credence lent to a pair of dichotomous propositions, yes? And the answer is yes, that's correct. To believe neither a claim nor its negation, a perfect equilibrium must be maintained in the degree of credence lent to the pair of dichotomous propositions. This means assigning exactly equal probabilities to both the claim and its negation. In this state of perfect equilibrium, you wouldn't have a strong belief in either proposition and would effectively be in a state of non-belief regarding both. To which I then ask, is that a realistic expectation? And the answer to that is, Maintaining a perfect equilibrium in the degree of credence between two dichotomous propositions in practice can be exceedingly challenging, and some might argue it's not a realistic expectation in many real world situations. In reality, humans tend to have biases, prior beliefs, and various other cognitive factors that can influence how they assign credence to propositions. Achieving a perfect equilibrium would require an extraordinary level of precision and consistency in our cognitive processes, which may not always be achievable. That said, in certain abstract or formalized contexts, such as mathematical or logical proofs, it might be possible to theoretically maintain such an equilibrium. However, even in these cases, it would be a highly controlled and artificial scenario. In everyday life, it's more common for people to hold beliefs with varying degrees of confidence, and these beliefs can change over time in response to new information and experiences. So, while a perfect equilibrium might be an interesting theoretical concept, it's not necessarily a practical expectation in many real world situations. So, I ask, just to be clear here, then you agree that while the concept of non belief may be an interesting theoretical concept, it's unrealistic. And the answer to that is the concept of non belief is indeed a valid and meaningful concept in philosophy and epistemology. It refers to the absence of belief in a proposition. The state can arise for various reasons, such as insufficient evidence, conflicting evidence, or a lack of clear justification for accepting or rejecting a claim. While it's theoretically possible to maintain a perfect equilibrium in the degree of credence between two autonomous propositions, resulting in a state of non-belief in either, achieving this equilibrium in practice can be highly challenging and may not align with how beliefs typically operate in real-world scenarios. So while non-belief is a valid concept, it's important to recognize that beliefs in practice are often influenced by a range of factors, and maintaining a perfect equilibrium in belief degrees may not be a realistic expectation in many everyday situations. So I'm trying to zone in here, and I say, that's not what I asked you. Given the unlikelihood of maintaining the necessary equilibrium with regard to the degree of credence lent a pair of dichotomous propositions, is non-belief a realistic expectation? And the answer is, given the complexities of human cognition, the practicality of maintaining a perfect equilibrium in the degree of credence between two dichotomous propositions can indeed be highly challenging. In many real-world situations, achieving and maintaining this equilibrium is not a realistic expectation. In practice, beliefs are often influenced by a multitude of factors, including evidence, prior experiences, cognitive biases, and emotional responses, can lead to varying degrees of belief in different propositions rather than perfect equilibrium. Therefore, while the concept of non-belief is valid in theory and has philosophical significance, it's important to acknowledge that in everyday situations, achieving a state of perfect equilibrium in degrees is often not a realistic expectation. People tend to hold beliefs with varying degrees of confidence based on the information and experience available to them. So I'm wanting to really put the button on this here, and I ask, please be clear and concise in your response. Though an interesting theoretical concept, if non-belief is non-belief realistic, given the inherent difficulty in maintaining a perfect equilibrium in the degree of credence lent to a pair of dichotomous propositions required for such a state? And the answer is definitively no. Achieving a state of perfect equilibrium for non-belief in real-world situations is not a realistic expectation, given the inherent difficulty of maintaining such equilibrium in the degree of credence between dichotomous propositions. All right. This is a major reason why I reject the concept of non-belief outright. It entails that one maintain a perfect equilibrium with regard to the degree of credence lent to both the existence and the non-existence of any deity. That, in turn, entails that one finds the cumulative arguments for the existence of a deity to be equally compelling as the cumulative arguments for the non-existence of any deity. And to those that say that this is the case with them, I think that's rubbish. It's simply not a realistic expectation to find neither proposition any more or less likely than the other. Yet we're expected to accept the idea that this is the case with tens, if not hundreds of millions of atheists around the world who express non-belief. I'm sorry, but I think that's bogus. If one finds the cumulative arguments for one proposition to be more likely than the other by any degree whatsoever, even if 0.00 ... 1%, that still constitutes belief. And no amount of denying that is going to change anything. I still have more reasons that I will be getting into for why I reject the concept of non-belief, and we will be getting into that. But for now, I will tell you once more that even if your beliefs aren't necessarily true, they should be justified nonetheless.